continue right here on Motswana Tonight. Now, the search for new feed ingredients is one of the most paramount, is of paramount importance, as current feed resources may be inadequate, especially for the projected livestock population increase in the near future. With this, a research that lasted for 4 years was conducted to find out whether Morula kennel cake can be used as a supplementary feed for ruminants, using sheep as a case study. To get more insight on this research findings, I am joined by Dr. Baleseng, an animal nutritionist professional who is also a Botswana University of Agriculture and Natural Resources BUAN alumni. Good evening, Dr. Baleseng, and welcome to Botswana Tonight.
Good evening.
We are talking about livestock feed. We are talking about livestock feed, in particular looking at ruminants, having used sheep ganadingu as your case study. Perhaps tell us a bit about the research that you conducted and why, what really prompted you to pick that specific area of focus.
Thank you. In Botswana, most of our farmers, they graze their animals in natural pastures. And the challenge that we have is that our pastures usually deteriorate, especially during the dry period or during the winter period. That is to say, the livestock year is divided into 2 seasons. That is the wet season and the dry season. During the wet season, since the pastures, there's a regrowth, the nutrition is not that bad. But during the dry season, that's when most of the grasses are old, therefore in poor quality, and they're also limited in quality. As such, our farmers are obliged or obligated to buy supplementary feeds so that they can augment the limited feed resources during the dry season. Therefore, these supplementary feeds, they're very expensive, especially that we import them from neighboring countries such as South Africa, Zambia, and so on. Therefore, as an animal nutritionist, we periodically look for unconventional feed ingredient so that we can check for their potential as animal supplements to use during this trying time, that is the dry season.
Okay. Jaanong yaka o tlhalosa re dirile dipatlisiso tse gone go bona gore go ka dirisiwa eng se ileng gore se ka hiwa tsone dihutshane tsa rona kgotsa le tsone dikgomo tsa rona go bona gore re ise ko tlase madi a leng gore ba dirisa go reka dijo tse leng gore ba di ha leruo la bone, re lebile gore dilo tse ba di reka ko Afrika Borwa, mme ebile gape re lebile gore mo gae tse di leng teng ga go nna le phetogo ya loapi kana dipaka di change go raya gore tlhaga jalo le tse dingwe quality ya teng ya ko tlase.
Yes, indeed. So what we did is that as we were searching for this potential feed ingredient, we came across an industrial byproduct by the name of Morula kennel cake. So Morula kennel cake is a byproduct from oil extraction from Morula fruits. So that's the byproduct that we identified to do in-depth research on.
Okay. Morula, why specifically Morula of all other things that are locally available?
Well, we chose Morula kennel cake because Morula tree grows naturally in Botswana and is very abundant. Hence, we felt that since the industry of oil extraction from Morula fruits is emerging, with time, the byproduct will be amply enough to be exploited by the livestock farmers.
Okay. I think as you're speaking about the extraction of oil from morula and into kernel cake that can then be fed to ruminants also speaks to developing that value chain that is quite often spoken about. But one may want to find out, before we even get to the findings of your research, yes, morula tree grows everywhere really across Botswana. It's easily found across Botswana. But are there other studies either in Africa, in the continent, or elsewhere that really speaks to morula and morula kernel being that supplementary substitute?
Yes, after realizing that there are some agro industries extracting oil from morula, we did a literature review in the region. So we found out that morula kernel cake research is currently ongoing in Eswatini, South Africa, and Namibia. And they did a lot of work on it from its value chain, including livestock production. Hence, in our literature review, we found that, or rather we identified some knowledge gaps that we can do in Botswana, so that whatever we find could be of benefit to the SADC region and or globally.
Okay. Now, this is a research that took 4 years, from 2018 to 2022. Was it part of your PhD candidacy with the university, with the Botswana University of Agriculture and Natural Sciences?
Yes, it was part of my PhD program.
Okay. And what are the findings?
Yes, thank you. So the general objective of this research work was to evaluate the potential use of morula kernel cake as a feed ingredient in the diets of ruminants. So when we planned the experiment, we planned for 4 experiments. So maybe I should back off and say, when you determine a feed value of an ingredient, you have to start by characterizing it, that is, determine its chemical composition. After that, you determine its digestibility, and then lastly, you determine how the animal will utilize it. So our experiment that we set up were based on that.
Can we just pause there, Dr. Baleseng? You determined 3 things, and you are speaking about those 3 things, I think, in PhD terms. Really, in very simple language.
So, yeah, what I was saying, if you determine the value of a feed ingredient, the first thing that you do, you determine the nutrients that are found in that ingredient.
Okay.
And then, yes. And then secondly, you find out how the feed will be digested, or used by the animal to get those nutrients. And then lastly, you determine how the animal, or rather how much the animal will eat of that ingredient and utilize it.
Okay. No, we can go on. So these are the things that we were looking into, as we look into these things, how did we go about this study, this case study, and yes, then we can go into the findings.
So the first experiment that was set up was to do lab work, that is to chemically characterize morula kernel cake. So from the analysis, we found that morula kernel cake is rich in protein, energy, and then from the minerals, it's rich in phosphorus and magnesium. And then we also found its limitations, that is regarding minerals. It lacks calcium, sodium, and potassium. And then the other thing about it is that regarding amino acids, we found that it has lots of or it has a good amino acid profile. So in the lab, we are comparing.
Dr. Baleseng, ko
Okay.
re bua ka bo amino acids ga ke itse gore o eleng gore o na le kgatlhego mo puisanong ya rona a na le dinku a na le dihutshane a na le dikgomo mme bile a na le kgatlhego ya gore gongwe ke morula kernel cake ke sengwe se re ka se dirisa ga re bua ka bo di-amino acids re bua ka dikotla tsa mohuta mang gone ha re bua ka bo protein le tse dingwe hela jalo gore ha re ka go di baka ka tsela e leng gore morui go pela kwa a ka tswang le teng a ka kgona gore tlhaloganya go sala morago puisano ya rona.
So amino acids, we define them as building blocks of proteins. That is, amino acids are used to make proteins. Yeah. So when you digest proteins, they are broken down into amino acids. And the amino acids are the ones that are absorbed in the small intestine and deposited in animal tissues.
This is a highly technical. Jaanong ha re dira dipatlisiso tsa rona re itlhetse le gore morula kernel cake o na le menontsane mengwe e leng gore e botlhokwa mme le ha ntse e na le menontsane e botlhokwa eo e shota menontsane mengwe gape e leng gore ha ile gore ra go neela dihutshane tsa rona kana leruo la rona morula kernel cake go ra gore ra go tlhokana le gore re tswakanya ka menontsane mengwe go netefatsa gore leruo la rona le kgona go bona dikotla tse di kwenneng.
Yes, usually with regard to feed ingredients, we always say that there is no perfect feed ingredient. Each ingredient has its own strengths and limitations. So hence, that's why when we make a diet for animals, we always mix several ingredients so that we come up with a balanced diet.
Okay. Jaanong ha le ne le dirisa dipatlisiso tsa lona o tlhalositse kgantele o ne wa ntlhalosetsa gore ha le dira tsone dipatlisiso le taletswa kanya le tsokonyolla le ne le tsere gongwe dinkula di kgaoganya ka maphata a mane gone gore le ke go tsenya yone menontsane le metswako e harologaneng gongwe ka re tlhalosetsa ka tsone dipatlisiso tse.
Okay, after chemical characterization of morula kernel cake, that is after understanding its nutritional value. That's where now we had to test it using animals, because sometimes what you get in the lab is not necessarily what the animal will get, because some plant supplements, they do have anti-nutrients, which will sometimes make the nutrients not available to the animal. Hence the importance of doing animal studies. So the first animal study, the question that we are asking that we are asking ourselves was, at what level can you use morula kernel cake in animal diets? Okay. Therefore, we formulated 4 diets. The first diet, there was no morula cake, so instead we used urea, feed grade urea. And then the second diet, we added 4% morula kernel cake. And then the second diet, we added 8% morula kernel cake. And then the last diet, we added 12% morula kernel cake. So this feeding trial was, or rather, these diets were given to lambs or sheep, as the growing sheep, as the experimental animals. And the sheep were given these diets for 90 days. So during the feeding period, we were weighing them every 2 weeks. And then we were also weighing the amount of feed that they were eating, so that at the end of the experiment, you can determine feed intake and also determine how they were growing. So at the end of the experiment, we found that as morula kernel cake increased in the diets, performance in terms of growth improved. And we also found that the nutrients were used better as morula kernel cake increased in the diet. So that's completed the second study. And then from this study, we learned that you can feed morula cake in sheep from 4% to 12%. But to get better growth performance, you should use 12%.
Okay. How do you growth performance? Every growth performance increased.
Growth performance here, I'm referring to weight, how much they weigh.
Okay. Motho a ka batla go itse gore ga gore di gain weight ka speed.
Yeah, so I want to say that the ones that were given 12% marula kernel cake, I meant that they were growing at a faster rate than those that were given, let's say, no marula kernel cake.
Okay.
Yeah, because when you compared all the groups that were given marula cake to the control, the ones that did not have marula cake, growth performance improved by 42%.
Okay.
Yeah.
Want to find out if you are a farmer and obviously you are in this to sell and people but lamb chops. What does this mean to the quality? If the growth performance increases, what does it mean to the quality then of the product at the end of the day? Some people like it aged, so what does this mean to the quality of the meat?
So as I mentioned earlier, I said during this research, we conducted 4 experiments. So that question will be addressed in the last experiments when we'll be talking about meat quality attributes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Then fine. We find that there is growth, increased growth performance. What else have we then found out of these studies?
So after finishing the first animal experiment, we did another follow-up experiment because the modern consumer of meat, they want to eat meat that is not a health hazard. Therefore, we repeated this experiment. That is, again, we had another batch of sheep and we repeated the experiment for another 90 days using different animals. So the intention was to get blood samples and then determine the health status of the animals in terms of blood metabolites. That is, we are checking the level of protein in the blood. We are also checking the level of urea in the blood. And then the other thing, we checked the blood cells, whether they were normal or rather the blood cell number. We checked whether they are within the normal range or not. So that was the purpose of this experiment. Because using the blood metabolites, you can tell whether the diets that we used had harmful anti-nutrients or not. So we conducted that study, but we are not only collecting blood samples. Like I said, it was a repeated one with additional parameters. So the growing experiment or feeding experiment was run for another 90 days. We are also measuring growth performance and feed intake. Thereafter, at the end of the experiment, we collected blood samples. So at the end of the experiment, these findings confirmed what we found earlier in terms of growth performance, that marula treatments performed better than the control experiment, the one that was given, those that were given urea, died with urea. And then the other thing, we found that the blood metabolites, that is the protein and urea, were normal. And also we found that the amount of urea in the blood increased as the amount of marula kernel cake increases in the diet.
Okay. Now let's talk about the amount of urea increasing in the blood. Obviously, I'm not a farmer. I don't know what urea is. Is that a good thing? Is that a positive thing? That okay, there's good growth. Now with this as well, there is urea has increases in the blood of animals.
Yeah, usually urea is very toxic when it exceeds the threshold. So like I was saying, in these diets, we are feeding incremental Morula kernel cake. So at 12%, the urea was within, blood urea was within the recommended range. So the implication is that if we were to feed beyond 12%, that is, let's say, maybe 15% or 17% of Morula kernel cake, there is a likelihood that the animal will die from toxicity due to urea poisoning.
Okay. I think this is quite an interesting study. Now we know the right amount sort of to give to our animals. What else do we get out of these findings? So
after doing these first 2 animal studies, we chose the best diet from these 2 studies, which was a diet having 12% Morula kernel cake. So the thinking was that, okay, for the farmers to adopt this technology, they'll ask questions like, how different is Morula kernel cake to lucerne? Or how different is Morula kernel cake to sunflower seed cake or soybean meal? That is the conventional protein sources or supplements that they usually use here, the ones that I was saying we import them from South Africa. So we set up this experiment, or the last experiment, we set it such that we are going to compare the diet having Morula kernel cake at 10 or at 12% level to a diet having sunflower seed cake, and then another diet. It was a commercial diet that is called a feed finisher. It's locally sold in feed shops. So we set up that experiment, and then in that experiment again, we are also thinking of the farmer. The farmer, for them to adopt a technology, they would want to know whether it will reduce the feed costs. So in the study, we also included the aspect of economics. So, and then the other thing, we also determined at the end of the study, we collected meat samples so that we can determine the meat quality. Since Morula cake is a new feed ingredient, and from the literature that we searched, no study has been done on that aspect of sensory attributes. So we conducted the feeding experiment for 100 days. So after 100 days, we found that growth performance across the 3 diets that we compared was similar. We also found that in terms of economics, the gross margin was better in Morula kernel cake diet than in the commercial diet, the one that was having lucerne as a source of protein. So which means that the gross margin was reduced by 20%.
Okay. I think when we talk about percentages, in the absence of numbers, it sort of becomes very tricky to then say what exactly does this 20% translate into. But I do want us to go back to, we're talking about Morula kernel coming out of the extraction of oil out of Morula hela or and as a farmer, I'm thinking, if we're saying locally produced, do we even have those organizations, those companies that are doing this extraction for us to easily be looking to, this is where we can source this Morula kernel cake to feed our animals? How practical would it be for us to adopt, you referred to it as a technology, to adapt this technology into our farms, into our livestock production?
Yeah, like we mentioned earlier, I think as a country, the best thing to do will be to start off by developing the value chain of Morula tree so that we can have all the players involved in the value chain. Because for us in the livestock industry, we'll be relying on the companies that are responsible for extracting the oil from the fruits, because us, we are just using their byproduct. But the primary output from the fruit is the oil.
Okay.
And the oil from morula is a high value oil because the oil is rich in oleic acid, or what is referred as good fat, which one is found in animal tissues. It helps to reduce, that is in human diet, it helps to reduce heart-related diseases. That's why the oil is highly valued.
Okay. In simple terms, how does this study benefit the livestock farmer?
The take-home message is that morula kernel cake, you can use it to partially replace the usual conventional protein sources. That is sunflower seed cake, lucerne, or soybean meal. And then the other thing you can, because in the first study, you also find out it is rapidly digested in the stomach of the animal. So that is good, meaning that you can use it to replace another ingredient called urea, since it is highly degraded in the stomach. Therefore, it will help to supply the animal with the much needed nitrogen needed for digestion.
Okay. Now I'm also thinking right now I'm listening to you and I'm listening to the benefits. Without promoting any other organization out there, if it's a technology that I want to adopt, where do I go? Where do I begin?
So currently, like I said, the industry of oil extraction from wool, where we are getting the byproduct, is still an emerging industry. But there is one company in Gabane that one can purchase the byproduct from.
Okay. I think what we also want to find out, and I think we didn't go back to touch on it, is the quality of the meat. After we've done all these studies, we get to the fourth study where we're looking into the quality of the meat and how different is it from lucerne, from sunflower fed, and the like.
Okay, that's a good question. So at the end of the feeding trial, like I said, the lambs were slaughtered after 103 days of feeding. So we got the meat samples, and then we conducted what we call sensory analysis, whereby the meat from the 3 respective groups was cooked. And then after cooking, it was given to panelists to compare the meat samples. So the results of for sensory analysis, we're testing for flavor. We are also testing for juiciness. We are also testing for appearance. And then we are also testing for sensory tenderness. That is how tough it is to chew. And then we are also testing for overall impression. That is how consumers think of the meat. So when they rated all these attributes, marula cake numerically was rated the best. Hence, we can say it enhanced the sensory attributes of meat compared to the other 2 protein sources. Okay.
Just out of interest, why is there a cake?
Yeah, it's called a cake because of how it was extracted. It can be extracted mechanically from the morula fruits, or it can be extracted using chemicals. When you extract using chemicals, it is called a meal. So we'll say marula meal. But when it extracted using machines, it's called a cake.
Okay.
Because it cakes when you press.
Yeah. Okay. Now, if one wants to grab this research findings and they want to interrogate it for themselves, or want to study and understand further and really read into your findings, where is it published? Can we find it? Where can we find it?
So currently, we are working on publishing or packaging the messages. I think throughout very soon it will be publicized locally. But so far we have one journal article in a journal called Animals. That's why we have a paper on meat quality.
Okay. And then how do we monetize?
Pardon?
How are you, as the owner of this research, going to monetize out of this research?
Well, I think the research, since it was sponsored by the Botswana government, so it's just for the benefit of the Botswana.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Leonard Baleseng. We thank you for your insights this evening.
Thank you.
Yeah. It's a Milejalo Pisano Yarnale, Dr. Leonard Baleseng, an animal nutritionist from BUAN. He is an alumni from that particular institution, basically speaking to us about Morula kennel cake, which can be used as a supplementary feed for ruminants. In this particular case, he was using sheep as his case study.